let's imagine like a train,
Mm.
like a train with tons of cars, right? Like once you get that thing moving, you really don't want to slow it down until you reach your destination. If you prematurely stop that thing without getting everything moving again and getting approvals to start moving again and making sure everything's where it's supposed to be, even just the act of moving something that heavy takes forever. And for many of us, we build up all this momentum with our shows, and then we were like, okay, we'll just stop real quick. And unfortunately, that's just not the nature of it. So the first thing I want to share, Kristen, and to everyone, holistic podcasting, you got to keep it going.
If you are a female Christian entrepreneur or life coach, you need a podcast. And if you have a podcast, you need a podcast coach. Finding a supportive and empowering community is key to podcaster success. Through my holistic approach as a trained life coach and my experience in the podcast industry since 2016, I want to encourage you weekly through answering your podcasting questions. I'm cheering for you, and your voice matters. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Holistic Podcasting. I am so honored to have Alex Sanfilippo with me today. He is like the creator of all things podcasting that are really helpful. So we got PodMatch, we have Podcast SOP, we have Pod Lottery. Man, it is truly an honor to have you here with me today, Alex.
Kristen, I'm equally as honored. I am so excited to be here. You are such a good podcaster. As a matter of fact, I want to give a quick shout out already. I started listening to a recent episode, and forgive me for not knowing the number of it, but it was about Pinterest and using it to grow a podcast. You had Amber on to talk about that. It was so good and so compelling, but my team told me I'm not allowed to do anything new. I had to just shut it off. But it's very rare that I start listening to content on podcasting that is so good that I feel compelled to take action. Again, I didn't take action today, but that's very rare, and you're just doing a phenomenal job. So truly, it's a gift to be here with you today. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Well, that one was a great episode. Amber brought the heat and for sure inspired many people to get going on their Pinterest game as podcasters. So, yep, when you're ready to dive into something new, then
Amber, I'm
definitely.
coming after you when it's that time. Not yet.
That's right. So, like I said, Alex is the creator of many amazing tools for podcasters, and he's also the host of Podcasting Made Simple. And I love your podcast because you present it in a way that is like, hey, I'm coming to a masterclass to learn how to do this well. And it's very efficient, to the point, and very valuable every single episode. So go check that out. Put that on your learning list as a podcaster. That Podcasting Made Simple is going to continue to provide so much value to you as a podcaster.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm just waiting for you to come on the show. That's all I'm waiting for. That's why we have it. So I'm looking forward to that day. Let's put it that way. I'm going to call you out right here.
Okay. Yes, we have to get that set up. But I have you on the show because as I was planning for summer and just thinking about my podcasters, and I know there can be a heaviness of like, gosh, how do I balance creating my podcast with motherhood, with my business, with summer plans? And I immediately thought of you, Alex, to come and bring another voice into this conversation of why it's really important to be strategic and intentional with your summer as well as any other season. So I would love for you to just go for it and share your thoughts on summer content, on the rhythms of summer in podcasting.
Yeah, Kristen, thank you again. And first off, you could call this podcasting anytime. Like your last episode that like we're continuing off was number 74 from 5/22/2023. And I encourage everyone, go back and listen to that. So episode 74 of Holistic Podcasting. And you said how to keep your podcast going during summer, but you could say during holidays, during Christmas, during New Year's, during school years, right? Like it could be anything. But I think it's so important that we think about times like these, and summer being the biggest one. As a matter of fact, if you look at the data, which is something that isn't necessarily my favorite, but I kind of need to know the data with what I do in podcasting. This is the biggest drop-off point we see every year, aside from the last 2 weeks of the year. And that's usually a quick bump right back. But people stop their podcasting at this time, many of which, though, Kristen, that I talked to, have the intent of coming back. But once life happens, and you know how it is, like you make some margin and then you fill it with something else. You fill up that time, and then by the end of summer, you're like, how was I ever podcasting? There's no way I can bring this back.
So
And so the
true.
first thing I want to share is, unless it's extremely strategic, which even that I don't really recommend, you got to keep with it. You got to keep on going. Like, you can't just let this be the reason that you say, all right, well, I'm gonna take a 3-month break and come back to it. It just doesn't, it usually doesn't work that way. I know we all have good intent and many of us think it won't happen to us, but I've seen it happen to even the best of the best. It's really hard to get this machine moving again once you stop it. I like to think of it as let's imagine like a train,
Mm.
like a train with tons of cars, right? Like, once you get that thing moving, you really don't want to slow it down until you reach your destination. If you prematurely stop that thing without getting everything moving again and getting approvals to start moving again and making sure everything's where it's supposed to be, even just the act of moving something that heavy takes forever. And for many of us, we build up all this momentum with our shows, and then we were like, okay, we'll just stop real quick. And unfortunately, that's just not the nature of it. So the first thing I want to share, Kristin, and to everyone, holistic podcasting, you got to keep it going.
Mm.
And I, of course, want to get very practical on that, but I want to turn it back over to you, see if you have any thoughts on that or anything like that before we keep on going.
Oh, I love that analogy because it totally makes sense. I actually was just talking to some of my podcasters where we did a workshop on summer content planning. And the question was, do I take a break? Do I make a series? Do I do a season and end it for the summer and then come back? And she's new, this one particular person, she's new to podcasting. And I said almost the same thing. I said, you really need a full year under your belt before you even think about a series or a season and having those breaks. Because just like you said, this is the time that you're gaining momentum, and to stop prematurely, that just wreaks havoc on not only like you as a podcaster and developing that skill over and over and over again of hitting record, but it also prevents your listener from that consistency. Every Monday morning I'm plugging in my headphones, I'm going on my walk with my dog, and I know this episode's coming out. And then to have that halt is, yeah, that it can be, no, just hard, just hard. So keep going. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, what we have to talk about then is what works.
Mm-hmm.
And to your point, real quick, actually, I'm actually pulling at you right now, Kristin. I feel like you're so passionate about this. One of the first things I always hear you say in your podcast is, hold on, let me back up. So now I have to do that. So let me back up before we
Okay.
get into what works. And just to reinforce something you said, I don't watch TV anymore, but in a previous time when I used to watch TV, there was regularly pilots of shows that come out. They do one season, of course, not knowing if it's going to work. So it's a little bit different. But I'd be like, wow, I wish there was more of that. I'd love to watch it. Do I ever go back later to see if it happened?
Mm.
I can't think of any times I ever actually went back to check. And for all I know, 2 years later, there might have been 2 more seasons I wasn't aware of.
Yeah.
For our podcast, we don't want people to get there. If somebody
Yeah.
loves your show and it becomes something they're like, I'm going to binge this podcast, right? I'm going to listen to all these episodes. You got 12 of them, 13 of them, 14 of them, right? Whatever it is, they're super excited. They get to the end of it, like, guess that's it. Most people, to save room in their queue, and they're probably going to unsubscribe and find another show, or a related show is going to come up and they're like, ooh, here's this one. You
Mm-hmm.
just don't want that to happen. You want to show people that you're in this with them.
Yeah.
And people love being caught up because they feel like, okay, I've listened to all this. I'm to the latest episode. Now it's almost like I'm going to be here every week because I want to make sure that I'm not missing anything. And so
Yeah.
again, just reinforcing your point there. So we have to talk about is how to not stop, but what works in that.
Mm-hmm.
And the first thing I want to share here is something that I would not have shared, Kristin, if I didn't listen to your episode number 74 about this. But you said the first thing we need to do is invite Jesus into the conversation
Mm-hmm.
because he is our co-host.
Yes.
Man, like you said, Jesus has given us a message to share. He's given us a voice to carry his wisdom, joy, testimony, and peace into the world. And for anyone who thinks, wow, Alex, that's so elegantly said, that was Kristin who said that. I'm literally reading off what I wrote down that she said. But the truth is, God will give you the fulfillment you need to continue going through summer. We have to pray for that empowerment first and foremost.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to get really practical here, but I'm telling you, if it's all for nothing if we don't get that part right. Why would you not do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I love that you shared that was inspiration to me, even being like, man, sometimes it gets tough. I got to buckle up. Maybe I just need to pray a little bit more, right?
Mm.
Maybe God's going to give me a creative way or more energy or more empowerment to be able to make it happen. So I love that you shared that. Beyond that, so once you do that as the foundation, what works? The very first thing that comes to mind when we start talking about this, Kristin, is batching.
Mm-hmm.
Batching your content. So if depending on when you're listening to this, it might be almost summer, almost Christmas, almost spring break, right? It could be any of those things.
Mm-hmm.
If one of those type of things is coming up, think about it strategically ahead of time and say, okay, what are all the things I need to get done in order to just take that week off or take that 2 weeks off?
Yeah.
right? So we had to think about how we can actually batch to a certain point of like, I can get all the recordings done. And I actually love editing, or I sub out the editing so I can do that later, or I can make all the social media posts and schedule them all through this app. What are all the things that you can do ahead of time before we even reach that point where it gets really hard to do it?
Mhm.
Now, with that said, I think that works well for maybe end of year and spring break, but with summer, it being such a long time, I did take one summer off. I don't remember what year it was, Chris. I think you got into this I think you got in 2016. Is that when you started?
Mhm. Yeah. Mhm.
Okay. I started in 2017. And I think it was 2018 maybe that I took off. When I came back, I was so rusty with everything. I
Mhm.
now no longer recommend batching that much. So again, when you're thinking strategically about batching all the work, don't say, okay, how do I get 3 or 4 months of content done? Because when you come back in that first interview, you're like, what was my name again? Didn't I have like an intro I used to say? Right. Or at least for me, I don't know if anyone else gets that foggy, but like when that happens, or again, when you batch for too long, even though you have the content, you fall into what we talked about before. Taking a break is more or
Mhm.
less what it is. It's hard to build the time to get back in.
Yeah.
So even with batching, you want to say, okay, I'm only going to podcast twice a month, or there's going to be 4 days a month that I'm actually devoted. I'm going to do it all in that time.
Mhm.
Find a way to make that happen with batching. And I'm telling you, it'll kind of keep you fresh and keep you moving along with it.
Yeah. Oh, yes. I could not agree more with the batching. And I think that's a really interesting point of don't batch too much where you lose touch with what you brought to the table, how you're coming to the microphone. That's really good. I've never really thought about that aspect like on the other extreme of batching too much. So, good point. Yeah, keep
I,
going.
I learned the hard way with that. Let's put it that way, right? Like it happened to me, and I was like, oh no, this wasn't a good idea. Before we move on from batching, Kristen, I wanted to hear, do you have any best practices for how to batch well, or how maybe you've done it? Because I I'm not a mom of four, but you probably have a different perspective on what that looks like than someone like me does.
Yeah. So it's really different for every podcaster. You could be, like you mentioned, you love editing. Great. So you block off all your editing time on one day. Or you can't stand editing, so you have designed, okay, I really love researching, writing, and recording all in the same day, but I do not like to edit or upload it to Libsyn and write the show notes. That is hard for me. So when I'm thinking about myself or other podcasters, I really try to find where they enjoy the most and then how can we batch that well. And then with the other things, more chunking it down. If they're not outsourcing those things that they don't enjoy, which I'm always going to recommend that, delegate, delegate, delegate.
Yes.
But if you are doing the things that are not the most enjoyable, to do 20-minute increments here and there. You don't have to do the whole shebang from beginning to end in one day. I have found personally, I tank. If I am researching, recording, writing my show notes, uploading to Libsyn, all of the things, promoting the social media, by the end of the day, I am toast and I am not in a good place to be present for my kids. So I know my energy is not limitless every day. So I really have had to walk through a lot of coaching, like my own self coaching and having a coach with me to really figure out what areas I can harness that energy and go creative mode versus go do mode and save, because my main values are my family, so I want them to get the most of me, and so I just got to coordinate in that capacity.
It's so good because I do something the opposite. I'm the guy who a very popular podcaster gave me this advice at one point: just batch all of it. And so I remember one day I did 25 calls in one day, which was way too many. But that's like part of the work I do. 25 calls. I was like, oh
Okay.
my goodness. But I was like at the end, I was like, yeah, like I got
Yeah.
it knocked out. But I realized most of y'all talk to like I would rather die. Like
Yeah.
people are like, this is
Yes.
the worst thing I've ever heard. And that's actually where I'm actually going to recommend, Kristen. I think you're one of the best coaches in podcasting. And so
Mm.
if you're listening to this and being like, ooh, I really resonate with Alex said, doing 25 calls a day or editing all my podcast episodes in one day, or no, I need to find the things I love and just kind of block out 20 minutes a day to do this. The best thing you can do for your health in this is talk to Kristen, who is going to figure out what works best for you with you. And
Mm.
if you're not already working with Kristen now I just give you permission to make it happen and a reason to make it happen. If it's just for the very
Thank
least of
you.
figuring out how to podcast when times when it's not a good time to podcast, right?
Yeah.
Because we still have to do it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not always me a good day for it, but I'm telling you, you have to find the way to do that. So because we can just keep on going down, I'm going to move on here, Kristen, and
Yeah.
keep on going because you brought up all these other points I'm thinking about as well.
I know.
Having a system is key. Having some sort of system is key. For me, I use my own tool. So shameless plug here, podcast SOP. The SOP stands for Standard Operating Procedures. It's literally project management software specifically for helping podcasters release episodes. So it doesn't do all the fancy stuff and all. It's literally a glorified checklist that says, here's the 25 things you say you do every time you release an episode. The reason that, and you don't have to use that. If you use project management software already, this is not for you. If you're like me and you didn't have experience with Trello, Asana, Monday.com, then this is probably for you because you don't want something that does 20,000 things. But I digress. But my point is, at any point right now, I could load it up and within just a few seconds, I can tell you exactly where I'm at in the production process of my next episode. And again, on days when I'm trying not to podcast, I don't know if anyone else listening is like me, but sometimes a thought enters my head and that is there until I clear it. And what clears it means doesn't mean, oh, I'll think about that later. Or I need to write that down. No, I need to actually go see what's happening here. And sometimes my podcast production happens. I'm like, it's Sunday night and Tuesday morning, a podcast episode comes out. Is it done? Right? Like, did I can't remember. Did I do everything with that? So I go and I'm able to look within just a second, tell exactly the percentage completed is, what still needs to be done, or if it's completely done. That peace of mind for me from that system lets me actually enjoy the season I'm in, whether it be summer, whether it be winter, whatever it is, right? I'm actually able to sit back and say, I know where I'm at. I have it organized. And there's a lot of reason people stop podcasting, Kristen. You know, this is the anxiety and stress that comes with it. And a lot of that is because we haven't built a system around it. We try to use our head as an office, but your head is not made to be an office. It's for having ideas, not for storing them. And so without getting that out, we may be cloudy all summer because we don't really have a good system of organization. I think that having that isn't just about not podcasting, but also when you're not podcasting, making that time really fruitful and good. And like you said, Kristen, being with your family 100% instead of 95% saying, okay, do I have podcasting stuff I need to be doing? Knowing that is going to help make your time far more meaningful.
Yes. I mean, goodness, you're speaking my language of yes, structure creates freedom and having a system creates freedom. And absolutely, that's something that I tell my podcasters so much is when you have a plan, it's not that you're hard and fast, like these are the episodes that are coming out and I will not change, even if a new idea comes into my mind. That is not how it is at all. It's more of creating a system so that you can, like, I love what you just said, you can get out of your brain and onto something that is strategic and in place and step-by-step process. Yes.
And this whole idea of holistic podcasting, I love what you call this. And you kind of even brought this up, like your family is your priority. The number 2 contributing factor to a podcaster's success. And I have all the data to show this. I interviewed, which was far too many, 1,600 podcasters. Some that had left the industry, some who have made it, like they started with no money, no influence, and now they have both through podcasting, and 500 in between, right? So like, first off, I admit too many people, but the data was conclusive. And I never knew this before doing this, but the number 2 contributing factor to your success as a podcaster is your self-care. And so many of us, we completely just throw that out the window. We'll stay up all night to edit. We'll wake up early. We'll skip time with family, which is what many of us would say really matters. We'll decide, oh, summer's gonna be a great time for me to get ahead for winter, right? The thing is, we have to learn to have this work-life / podcasting balance. Like, you can't just be like work-life balance plus podcasting. It doesn't work like that. You have to find a way to fit all this in. And going back to something I started off saying, Kristen, was I talked about how I had to shut off your great episode with Amber about Pinterest, which again, I'm going to go back to one day. But right now, I know from a self-care perspective, if I decide I have to do this right now, I am going to pull myself out of this balance. And here's the thing. Sometimes work life, like if you think about it from like a juggling standpoint, if work is one ball and life is the other, and you just throw those up and down, I'm not very coordinated, but I think I can catch those most of the time. But the second you throw podcasting in that mix and I have to do all 3, I'm not going to be able to catch any of them. They're all going to fall to the ground because I'm not very coordinated, right? But many of us just assume, oh, it's just another thing. But the truth is we can't really keep up with it. We think we can, but we can't just bite off everything that we feel we need to do. So I'm going to give a quick little hack here to tell you all how to be a podcaster. And I think, Kristen, you probably covered this a little bit, but like how to be a podcaster. There's only one thing you have to do to be a podcaster. Everyone's ready. Everyone buckle up.
We're
You have
ready.
to consistently release podcast episodes. You
Yes.
do not need a blog. You do not need a website. You don't need to be on YouTube. You don't need to be on TikTok. You don't need to be on Pinterest. You don't need any social media. You don't need an email. You don't need anything. To be a podcaster, the only thing you have to do is consistently release podcast episodes. And I'll add that are valuable for someone to listen to.
Yes.
That's really the only thing. Now, all those add-ons are great, but at the end of the day, if you say, I can't actually have proper self-care and do all those things, just add them one at a time. But the problem is, many of us, we look at somebody else's year 20 in podcasting and compare it to our day one, saying, oh, well, Kristin does all these great things. Kristin started off just saying, is this thing on? Is this working?
Right.
Can anyone hear me? Right? And you weren't doing all the other things. You added them strategically as you realized, okay, I kind of mastered this. This is good. I can add this, which will be another wing of it. And it doesn't add a lot of pressure and stress. So right now, I'm telling everybody who's listening to this, give yourself the freedom to only podcast. I'm not telling you to drop everything, but if you say, you know what, TikTok is stressing me out so much, try stopping that for summer. If podcasting is your main thing, not TikTok, right? Stick with the main thing. Keep the main thing, but give that a shot. See if that brings more balance to your life with this. And I just kind of preached a little bit, Kristin, so I'm gonna turn it back over to you.
I love it. Preach on, because yes, I think from the perspective of podcasting is your main thing. That is your main creation, your main content, and everything else needs to flow from that. That it makes sense to, if you need a break in summer, then pull back on everything else, social media, newsletters, like you're saying, that it's a breath of fresh air to continue to keep the main thing, and to not worry about all the other stuff. Because how cool that the data that you are researching and have seen is confirming to, yes, consistency matters. Not consistency in promoting on social media or doing TikTok or whatever, but consistently putting out valuable episodes. That's awesome.
Yeah, and I know many people might be saying, okay, I hear this, Alex. The main thing is the business, right? And podcasting is part of that. We've all got to have some sort of lead gen, some sort of marketing funnel, right? Something. And maybe this isn't the case for everybody, but most people I've talked to, if not all of them, tell me that the podcast is the best way that they're actually bringing people to them, because it develops know, like, and trust, unlike any other form of content that you have. Yeah. So that to me, again, just says that, hey, maybe it's okay to stop some of those other things, even if it's temporary, to see what happens. I remember the day that we cut out Instagram, which is most people's favorite social platform, if you will, right? And we were making beautiful images, doing so much work. It was taking so much time, so much energy. And one day I told the team, I'm like, let's stop for a month and just see what happens. Like, this is going to be terrible. Like, we put so much work into it. I'm like, let's just stop for a month and see what happens. And we took that time and we used it on LinkedIn, and our podcast listenership doubled and our business doubled.
Whoa.
And I was just like, we're never going back to it. Our audience isn't there. I'm not saying that that's gonna be the case for you. It might be flipped. It might be LinkedIn is where you need to stop. You might need to go on Instagram. But the first sign of it is, if you aren't seeing fruit and it doesn't fulfill you, maybe try stopping. But again, I know a lot of people saying, well, the business is the main thing, but I think, again, podcasting is a great extension of that business. And obviously that's what we preach here. So yeah, so that's a really important point. Again, that self-care, and then the consistency is what we've been talking about just across the board. Like, I don't know what happens, but it seems like after a certain number of episodes, your content just starts taking off. And I can't really explain why that is, but there's something, I mean, it's just doing what others won't, right? Like, staying consistent in podcasting is doing what someone else won't do. And eventually you get rewarded for that.
Yes. Well, and it's that self-discipline of sticking with it. And it's just like working out. I mean, you're not going to see those instant results. It's going to be consistency over time that you start to see, oh, I feel better in my clothes. Or the analogy there is so thick that you could just keep going on that. But
yeah. Well, fitness, and you said thick. I like that. I see what you did there.
Yes. Okay. So self-care and consistency are the top two. You said the research was on the success of a podcaster, right?
Yeah. So actually, the number two, like, contributing factor to the success of a podcaster is self-care. Number one is actually self-discipline.
Oh,
and it makes sense those two would go together, though, because, like, first off, the person who has no discipline, they're gonna be like, yeah, I'll be back next week. And they're like, oh, I forgot. Yeah. I got busy, or I don't know. But it's funny because those two things actually can compete with each other. I'm more side on the self-discipline side. Like I'll do something until I burn myself to the ground, right? But
Interesting.
that's not enough, because even the most disciplined people, they're the ones that are like, I tried podcasting. It was awful. Like that's what the really disciplined people say. I did it for 5 years every single day, and now I can't, like I'm so burnt out, I can't keep up with it. So yeah, those are the top two. And then consistency, really, I mean, consistency is how you're going to see the result, right? So
Yeah.
consistency being, I'm not even sure where it falls in line. It's probably the third thing, if I have to imagine, though, because it's all right there.
Yeah.
And those three things are very, when we looked at the data, by the way, they were all like, they were extremely close. Like, and then there was a drop off after three with more of the things. But those are, again, self-discipline, self-care, and consistency really, really matter if you want to make it in podcasting.
Yes. Well, it's almost like the self-care and the self-discipline, they have to go hand in hand. Otherwise, you're way off on
Correct.
either
Oh,
of
yeah.
those. Like you have to, they are married. They are the same side of the
Yes.
coin. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's very well said. That's true.
Awesome. All right. Well, this is such a fascinating conversation. And I think for my podcasters that are listening, the tools and the encouragement that you're giving are so valuable. I'm curious, what have you found that is something to keep you motivated when you don't want to do a podcast? Or maybe it's like there's a vacation coming up and like some sort of motivational tool to keep going.
It's knowing your why and accompanying that with an avatar. So why did you start doing this in the first place? Like, let's go back to the day before you launched or when you started planning. Like, why were you going to do that? Who was it that you were going to serve? But taking that a step further, because sometimes we can feel disconnected from our why, but what we very rarely feel disconnected from is that avatar, which simply means your ideal listener. I always recommend it being a fictitious character, but tying that directly to your why and coming up with a real story of who that person is and how you're going to help them and how you're changing their life. And then for me, on the days that are really tough, is my avatar's name is Adam. Again, fictitious character. I can tell you anything about Adam. I say, what? Adam is counting on me to do this. Adam is counting on me. And the thing is that we all know is true. This is why accountability works. When you have someone who is relying on you, counting on you, it's much harder for you to stop. When you feel like, you know what? No reason I'm really doing this anyway. It's just for me. I'm out of here, right? Like we can all say that. But when you say, you know what? I'm doing this for person X, Y, or Z, we're able to say, I've got to keep on going. So for me, that's a really big thing. One of the things that really helps a lot, Kristin, and have a coach, first off, is huge. I have multiple coaches. There are a lot of people who speak into my life and into my podcasting. They'll me a ton. But along with that is community. Yeah. There's the old Helen Keller quote that says, alone we can do so little, but together we can do so much. And I think that if we're around like-minded people that all have the same goal in mind, even if we're all struggling, we're doing it together. And by doing it together, we're able to continue to drive forward and move forward.
Yes. Amen to all of that, because yes, and yes. So in this conversation that I just had with my group of podcasters, I literally just told one of them, you need to write out your why and stick it on your computer for those days that you're like, I don't want to record. Because a lot of my podcasters, and including myself, there can be our own internal conversation that prevents us from pressing record. And so even just having that, like, remember, you are called to do this. You're called to share your story. You're called to empower and encourage and equip other women or men, whatever your story. And that anchors you in, and it goes beyond motivation and it goes to purpose. And that's really where that empowerment comes to press record and continue to be consistent with our podcast. Oh, yes. Yeah.
It's the fuel, right? This is the fuel that we're talking about.
Exactly. Yes. Well, Alex, thank you so much for being here and just encouraging us through the summer rhythms. And is there any last minute little things that you want to share or point people towards? I would love for you to just have this little moment.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, yeah, the last thing I'll share, which I think might kind of tie all this together, it's three things I live by in everything I do. Automate, delegate, eliminate.
Yes.
Automate, delegate, eliminate. So automate simply means, is there a tool out here that can help me do something I don't enjoy? So you can look at everything I do is at podpros.com. You can see things we've built to help automate podcasting. Next is delegate. I used to like editing, but it became a point where I couldn't do this anymore. I couldn't be on this podcast because I'd be editing. So I delegated that work. And the last one's eliminate. We talked about how I got rid of Instagram. And for you, it might be something else. But if you always say, is there something I automate, delegate, or eliminate with my podcast or business
Mhm.
to get a better result or the same result while doing less? I'm telling you, that's going to serve you really well. And that's the kind of thought I'd end with today.
Awesome. I love that. That's a great last tool. Thank you again, Alex. It's been such a pleasure to have you here.
Thanks, Kristin. Honor. It was all mine to be here. Thank you.
Thanks for listening today, you guys. Hey, before you go, this summer, we are going to offer you a chance to join in to our next round of boot camps. There are two. One is for the brand new podcaster. You don't have a podcast yet, but you are wanting to launch a podcast by the end of 2023. Our podcast bootcamp from idea to launch is an 8-week group coaching course for you who is ready to take that step and make that dream a reality. And our second podcast bootcamp is our podcast growth and monetization. This is a chance for my current podcasters out there that are wanting to up level and continue to grow and expand and monetize your business with your podcast. This is another 8-week program where we are going to be group coaching with you week by week and having that accountability to up-level your podcast. So come and join me. The link's down below. We start August 1st, so make sure you sign up by the end of July.